Yeah, I think President Trump has just issued the annual or once every administration national security direction for the U.S., and there were several interesting pieces of it. All of it reflects exactly what President Trump has been saying. He wants to recognize China as the real adversary for the U.S. militarily, politically, economically. He wants to make sure that the U.S. establishes itself as the preeminent power in North and South America. But when it comes to Ukraine, it is clear that President Trump is frustrated with the amount of money that has gone to Ukraine, that we're now learning the corruption of Ukraine has been expedited and expanded dramatically in the last 4 years, when hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars have flowed from American taxpayers and from European taxpayers into the pockets of many of Zelensky's cronies, if not into his pockets as well. And I think President Trump, in this new national security assessment, has made it clear that it is up to Europe to look out for Europe. He has raised the amount of money that Europe is contributing to its own defense through increasing their percentages and actual payments for NATO defense, but also that if they're concerned about defending Ukraine, they need to be the ones stepping up, not the U.S. I think that this is going to continue. This conflict with Ukraine and Russia is going to continue because both Europe and the Ukrainian administration are absolutely adamant in refusing any accountability, any audit of where the money has gone. Clarissa, I've young sons. They're not as young as they used to be, but when they were teenagers, I would give them money on Fridays. And when they would come in on Saturday morning asking for more money, my first question was, what did you do with the money I already gave you? We should be asking and getting answers to that with respect to Ukraine. And I think the reason that the European Union and NATO and Ukraine don't want to answer that question is they know how many hundreds of billions have been diverted from what was intended for military use in Ukraine, for humanitarian use in Ukraine, but has been diverted elsewhere. So I think President Trump is at his ends game in terms of continuing to support Ukraine, particularly when there is a complete lack of recognition of reality by Ukraine. Russia did not just invade Ukraine on a whim. There were the Minsk Accords that Ukraine and the EU and NATO ignored and broke. There were agreements that NATO would not be expanded further towards Russia that have been broken. And the continued demand that Ukraine and the EU have that NATO be a part of Ukraine is a bright red line that keeps any peace deal from being done. And I think President Trump recognizes that. The idea that Ukraine will somehow win this conflict is irrational. You had Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, a few months ago declare that Ukraine is winning the conflict, but the front lines are just moving in the wrong direction. It may be the most insidiously stupid comment by a supposed world leader in the history of stupid comments by world leaders. Ukraine is not winning on the battlefield. Ukraine has no chance of winning on the battlefield, regardless of how many more resources and weapons that are provided to Ukraine. This war is lost, and it's time to end it in the carnage and move forward in a way of peace and prosperity that should have been done a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, I think the professor, maybe Professor Sachs, but I'm not entirely sure. But I think that the West is largely responsible of this moving forward into a conflict, as you mentioned earlier. That the West decided that the elected representatives in Ukraine were too close to Russia, and they removed the leadership with the Maidan coup, with the efforts to replace elected leadership with more Western-friendly leadership, ultimately in Zelensky. So, as was pointed out, they've acknowledged that whether it was Boris Johnson, whether it was Victoria Nuland, whether it was Angela Merkel, that they were trying to ignore the Minsk agreement and Minsk Accords in order to give just some time for Ukraine and NATO to build up to be able to do exactly what they did. And people, I think many people forget that Kamala Harris went to Kiev and declared that Ukraine would be brought into NATO. 3 days later, Russia initiated the special military operation. Now, here in the U.S., we knew that Kamala Harris, as vice president, was irrelevant and nobody cared what she said. But I think for the Ukrainians and for Russia, it looked like it was a message that was being sent. And obviously we had the corruptocrats in the Biden family that were profiting from Ukraine before and have profited during as well. So I think clearly the West helped precipitate this. I do want to touch on these rare earth minerals because I agree with almost everything Conrad just said, with one exception. I don't think President Trump is wanting to get repayment of the hundreds of billions that have been invested in Ukraine from the frozen Russian assets. I think President Trump and his team, Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, understand that is opening a Pandora's box of seizing assets of foreign nations that are deposited in your nation, creates the tit for tat. Well, we'll do the same thing. Nobody wants that has, the IQ above room temperature. I think what President Trump recognizes is that the rebuild, in particular of Eastern Ukraine, the business opportunities with Russia, whether it's developing opportunities in Antarctica, whether it's developing opportunities back in the Russian Federation, that's where the profiting can come from in a legitimate way that will ultimately compensate the U.S. And these rare earth minerals, as was pointed out by Yulia and by you, Clarice, there are these rare earth minerals that are in the eastern Ukraine portion, the Donbass, Luhansk, Mariupol areas. Those minerals are important. China has a lot of them. We have a lot of them here in the U.S. What's really important, though, is the processing of those materials. China has all these processing plants to convert the rare earth minerals into actual commodities and manufactured goods. The U.S. is about 2 years behind, maybe a year behind, in being able to develop the processing plants to take those rare earth minerals and turn them into something. I think the same thing is true in Eastern Ukraine. And when you look at the opportunities to create wealth, to create prosperity in that area, not only the mining of those materials, but setting up processing plants in Eastern Ukraine to take those materials and really make them extremely valuable by turning them into goods and products that can be used is absolutely vital. And I think that's where I would say is the best prospect of recovering the hundreds of billions. And finally, Clarice, as you and Yulia know, we were in Mariupol, we were in LPR, DPR, and what we saw was, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, the Chinese building new apartments, building roads, building the infrastructure. I want my American companies over there doing that. I want us building apartment buildings. I want my clients building apartment buildings there. So that profit and that prosperity can happen once this conflict is over, once we get back to doing business with each other. And I think, again, President Trump recognizes that China is the real military, political, and economic adversary to the U.S. and the world. Well, let's not keep pushing Russia into their arms. Let's get some American contractors over there building some of those apartment buildings and rebuilding Mariupol and then eventually rebuilding Pokrovsk and these other areas that have been devastated by war. They're going to need apartments. They're going to need roads, and I want American companies over there doing that.